Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Green 19 podcast. I'm Dominique Gates. I'm joined by Ryan Wood and Tom Silverstein. We're checking in on the offseason with the Green Bay Packers. Up to this point, Packers coach Matt LaFleur, Brian Gutekunst has talked. They've had locker room clean out, and there's already been some changes with the staff. So it's time we can kind of run through all of that and just kind of check back in and touch base. So I guess we can start with just now that people have talked. And Ryan, I'll go ahead and let you kick it off. Are there any just takeaways or impressions from either LaFleur, Gutekunst, what you heard from the locker room, or all of the above?
There was a lot.
Right.
That came, and it's not unusual. Usually the week after the regular season, after weeks and weeks of trying to ask and figure out what's going on and not getting a lot of answers because nobody wants to give up a competitive advantage. Now there is no competitive advantage to be given up because the season is over, and you find out a lot. So from player personnel, from Jordan Love's progression, there was a lot. But I think the thing that stands out is the last thing that we heard, at least the thing that stands out the most, from Brian Gutekunst about a question on, there was a lot of positives this season. They won 11 games, and they were a talented team that was able to make the playoffs again, second straight season with the youngest locker room in the league making to the playoffs. But this is the Green Bay Packers, and they weren't particularly close to sniffing a Super Bowl this year. And it wasn't because the NFC was so good. I mean, let's be real here. It's not because the NFC North was actually as dominant as the 40 wins from the top three teams would indicate, because they went 0-3 in the postseason, and they still didn't get particularly close to sniffing the playoffs. And Brian Gutekunst said the thing that's been weighing in his mind since the end of the season is that there's a need to ramp up the sense of urgency for this team, and that it's time to get back to winning championships and competing for championships. And if you watch this team down the stretch, the difference was stark to down the stretch a year ago in 2023. In 2023, this was a young group that rose together all collectively and got hot at the right time. Down the stretch of this season, this was a young group that floundered down the stretch. They went the opposite way. And I think everyone watching could see that sense of urgency was lacking. And as I think we found out here, this was not a juggernaut conference. This was an open conference. The Detroit Lions were all beat to hell, and that finally came back to get them. The Minnesota Vikings were a no-show against the Rams. The Rams weren't a juggernaut. The Philadelphia Eagles weren't a juggernaut. There might be a rookie quarterback that represents the NFC in the Super Bowl, and Jaden Daniels, a very talented rookie quarterback, but still a rookie quarterback nonetheless. It was there for the taking, and this Packers team did not have that kind of urgency to even put itself in consideration to make that kind of run. That's going to be hanging over everyone's head going into 2025. The third season of Jordan Love is understanding that making the playoffs and those opportunities to make that kind of run are precious. They are few, and they are special when they present themselves. You have to play with the urgency that we did not see from this team, because from the GM, it is time to get back to competing for championships.
Spoon, what about for you? Some takeaways from anything that you heard over the past week?
Yeah, I would agree that the last thing that Gutekunst said was probably the most relevant. And essentially, I think he just sent out a message to the entire organization that, you can't live off of the year before. And, I think he has to even take some of the blame for not treating this as a year where they probably had a shot at going to the Super Bowl. And it was really whatever team was going to be hot at the end of the year. And as it's turned out, Washington is the hot team, and that was the Packers last year. So, I don't think they ever found that. And I think his message is, hey, there's only so many years in a window that you've got a chance to win a Super Bowl, and they need to do it now. And I think his message was to players, I think it was to coaches and even LaFleur. And I think it was to personnel to, they have to have the best year of their best off season that they've had as a staff if they really want to push ahead and get ahead of all these other NFC teams who all of them are good. I still think the NFC is really good, but there's going to be attrition along the way when you're playing good teams all the time and you're, fighting each other. I think the wear and tear of being in the NFC North showed. There were injuries everywhere at the end. So I think it's really critical. I think what he's saying is that it's a critical time.
It was a huge message, no question about it, that he got out there. And I guess it was fascinating to hear it. And I think one of the reasons why that message really stood out was because he said in the presser he doesn't believe in Super Bowl windows, but he does want that urgency revved up, which is fair, right? Like you said, year 3 of Jordan Love, you're going to have Josh Jacobs, Xavier McKinney, young rookies that are going to be back in the fold of things. So I think it's clear that you really do need to start winning. Like 11 wins are cute, getting to the playoffs, it's cute, but it's time to kind of take that next step. So as you guys have watched these playoffs, I'll start with you, Ryan. What have been your impressions? Is it the biggest thing was just that you thought that the NFC might not have been as stacked as it was, or is there anything else that's really stood out to you?
I think Spoon said the right word. There were a lot of good teams in this conference. I don't see a great team in this conference. I think last year's 49ers team would have won this conference and gone to the Super Bowl fairly easily. I think last year's 2023 Packers team would have won this conference and gone to the Super Bowl. And if you base that off of this 2024 Packers team, not really even giving themselves a chance. I mean, it was wide open. There was a lot of good teams. There wasn't a great team standing in the way. There wasn't a juggernaut there. And they weren't even close. That's regression. That's taking a step back, which growth is not linear, and sometimes that happens. But now you're still going to be young, and you're still going to have the quarterback. You still have the pieces. What Ryan Gutekunst said is going to be what is measured from now until a year from now. Every personnel decision they make, every coaching move during games, the way Matt LaFleur leads another young locker room, everything Jordan Love does this offseason in training and developing and getting ready for his 3rd season, it's all going to be based on, can they take this step or not? Do they get better or not? And that's not assured. And the word that urgency is what does that. Having the proper urgency to know that you must seize the moment. It's not going to come for you. You got to go get it. Was lacking from this group. And had it not been, the path was there. So the Philadelphia Eagles are a very, very good team. Jaden Daniels is a very good quarterback, and he's got Washington cooking. The Rams with Matthew Stafford. I don't think that if the Packers had won their last 2 games, they would have been playing the Rams, I believe. Maybe it was the Bucs. I think they could beat the Bucs. I'm not sure they would have beaten the Rams in the wild card. They've been the 7. Matt LaFleur's led the youngest locker room in the league to playoffs in back-to-back years, but they've been the 7th seed in back-to-back years. They wouldn't have made the playoffs the last 2 years under the old format. They are at the bottom of the pecking order among the upper echelon of NFC teams, and they have to do something to change that because this is a conference where you can make a run. They weren't particularly close this year.
Spoon, what about for you, just as you've watched the playoffs, maybe even from not only the NFC but the AFC? Is there been anything that's stood out or just overall thoughts as you watched it?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. I mean, I still think the NFC is extremely strong. I think, Detroit kind of hit a wall at the end. And, if you think about what a team they would have been with Aiden Hutchinson and Akeem McNeil, they had a chance to be really good. Then they lose another cornerback in the game. It's a game of attrition. And Philadelphia is the team, that's kind of been blessed with no injuries. And I think they're a really good team. I would be surprised if Washington beats them, but, the hot team kind of wins. Either way, I think they're a legit Super Bowl team. I mean, they're not that far from the team they were how many years ago when they lost the Super Bowl to Kansas City. So I think there's still a strong, component to the NFC. I also think I think we have a tendency to romanticize the Packers of last year a little too much. Like, I think they were good offensively, but and they were in the San Francisco game, and they definitely could have won that game. But in a must-win game, I would not have laid my chips on Joe Barry in an NFC Championship game, and I would with Jeff Hafley. I thought Jeff Hafley probably had the best. I mean, he's done one of the best jobs of stopping Philadelphia that anybody had done. I mean, he held Saquon Barkley to a reasonable amount of yards. And, if they had any kind of offense, or if they don't fumble that first kickoff, they got a chance to win that game. So I think we tend to think, and this is true maybe even in the organization, that they thought the end of last year was, okay, lift off into next year. And every team is different. And this team never found that kind of groove. And I also think that, they did address areas of need, and it really helped. But, you got to have an immense amount of talent. And they just didn't have enough talent offensively. Their wide receivers weren't good enough. You have to have a legit wide receiver who's you can go to every time, and they didn't have that last year. And I also think that there were some coaching issues too. I mean, we never saw anything great out of the special teams. They struggled with a kicker most of the year. The return game was not very good. Their run blocking was really good, but I think you can pick apart their pass blocking in some instances. How they didn't have anybody ready when Elton Jenkins went down in the Eagles game is criminal. I mean, you have to have guys ready, and they obviously picked the wrong guy. It probably should have been Kadeem Telford. He was the guy who was playing all year. So, I mean, they're just kind of mistakes that were made, in my opinion, and that's the kind of stuff they got to evaluate and be really, really critical of themselves.
I think that stood out to me a lot as well, that it's like, look, everyone has to take another step and be better. But the one thing that I will say that's kind of fascinated me watching these playoffs, and Ryan, I guess sidebar, we were texting about it, and your quote said it best, is that the grass, isn't always greener. So I know it's fans. Some fans are going to be delusional. Some will get carried away, but sometimes I think it doesn't hurt to relax a little bit, especially immediately it's time to trade Jordan Love. It's time to fire Matt LaFleur now, because what I've seen throughout these playoffs, there's been plenty of coaching mistakes. There's been plenty of quarterbacks that have struggled. Jared Goff throwing 3 interceptions. Sam Darnold in the last 2 games hasn't played well. Lamar Jackson had 2 turnovers in this past game. And then like Dan Campbell with the coaching, having 12 men on the field late in the game. So I think that's something that stood out to me. I'm not taking away a lot of the mistakes and the issues that the Packers made, but I do think it's clear that no one is perfect. This is an imperfect game with imperfect players, even though the Packers still need to play better. But it was really fascinating sometimes when I see a lot of the chatter, even though, again, it's fans. Everyone's passionate about, so the teams that they root for. But at least for me, I think that you do need to relax, at least from the fans' perspective, just a little bit compared to what I've seen as of late.
It comes down to winning. When you win, everything looks good. So, this narrative that Matt LaFleur is out of control, and his sideline demeanor is killing them, and it's killing the locker room. And then I just read a story about Nick Sirianni, about how this is the reason why his players follow him, and he has, he screams at fans, and he screams at his players and fights his players, and all these things. Nick Sirianni is the same guy that Matt LaFleur is from an emotion standpoint, but that's a great thing. It's a great thing because he's winning. That's all it is. I mean, go ahead and rip a guy for blowing up in a game or whatever, but what it comes down to is wins and losses and how you look on the field. You know, are you organized? Are you competitive? Do you play at a consistent level? Are you up and down? I think those are the measures. And, you know, if you want to coach a new coach, then, you know, go ahead and get, you know, Matt Eberflus is available, or, you know, there's all kinds of guys like that. And I just think it's kind of, it is a fan thing. And there is pressure. There will be pressure on LaFleur next year, no question. He's got to win. But to even be considered, you know, people are picking and choosing because they didn't win. You got to win. That's the bottom line. It doesn't matter how, you got to win.
The devil you know is better than the devil you don't. And the other thing that stood out to me, what's really resonated with me watching the playoffs so far, is that everything that you could say about Matt LaFleur right now going into this offseason was said a year ago about Nick Sirianni. It never made sense to me from afar, but he was on the hot seat apparently in Philadelphia a year after taking them to the Super Bowl. Imagine if cooler heads had not prevailed there. Where would the Eagles be right now? They're the favorites now at home for the NFC Championship game to go to their second Super Bowl under Nick Sirianni in 3 years. That's why you give patience in this league. And that's not to look. Matt LaFleur needs to be better. He lost the Chicago game at the end of the year. If you want to look at critical coaching errors, those existed. But the whole sideline demeanor thing, that he's an emotional guy, is frankly nonsense to me. Football's an emotional game. You don't want a stagnant robot on the sideline. You want a leader who has the emotional intelligence to rally the troops, especially the youngest team in the locker room, or the youngest team in the NFL, get the locker room fired up, go out there and win. Now, it didn't translate because they didn't have a sense of urgency late in the season. The year before they did. They're going to need that in 2025. But there's so many bad coaches out there, just like there's so many bad quarterbacks out there. When you have a good one, just because there's mistakes and there needs to be improvement, which there does with Matt LaFleur, and there were with Matt LaFleur, just because those exist doesn't mean you just turn the page. Just what bad organizations do. There will be pressure on Matt LaFleur this season to go out and actually do what Brian Gutekunst said, compete for a championship. That's the standard. No one has to tell Matt LaFleur that. He knows that. He's got to be better, but there's a lot worse out there. And just like there's a lot worse than Nick Sirianni out there. And when you are able to be patient in this league, you're usually rewarded for that more times than not, especially when you know you've got a good head coach. And the Packers have a good head coach that needs to take some steps and be better.
As far as with the Jordan Love stuff, I think it's simple. Brett Favre did not have an MVP or a Super Bowl after 33 starts. Aaron Rodgers did not have a Super Bowl or an MVP after 33 starts. Granted, by that following year, Rodgers, you could say, blew up. I think by year 6 is when Brett Favre got the Super Bowl, I believe, as a starter. But again, I just think that I figured it was a fan thing, but it's fascinating just to hear it sometimes. I do have a question. Go ahead.
I will say that Jordan Love is a different issue than Matt LaFleur when fans can, want to bench him or whatever, but there is a different element and a different review there. And, this should have been towards the end of the year. He could have played crappy throughout the second year, but he really needed to lift his game in December, and he didn't. And that's a legitimate criticism. He did not play well in the biggest games. He didn't lift his team. Jaden Daniels, it's really clear that, he is doing things to elevate his team, whether, he's got a running element that helps his team. He's able to avoid the pressure. The fact that teams are afraid to blitz him and rush him is another factor. teams aren't afraid to blitz Jordan Love. They blitz him, repeatedly, and he hasn't figured out how to make a pay, or he and Matt LaFleur. So there's legitimate criticisms there, and then he's got to answer them next year. It doesn't mean he's a bad quarterback. It doesn't mean that he's a failure. He could be. We don't know for sure. But entering your third year is a good litmus test for where you stand as a quarterback.
I think the way that Brian Gutekunst put it was spot on. He said, I think it might have been me that asked him. I can't remember now, but where do you want to see Jordan Love take a step going into year 3? And he said, controlling the game, which is the standard of the quarterback position. It's what Patrick Mahomes does. It's what Tom Brady did before him. You look at those guys; they didn't give a damn about the stats. They don't care about anything other than what is the winning play on this snap, over and over and over and over again. That is how you control a game. That is what we didn't see from Jordan Love, and he still is a young quarterback, but we need to see that in his third season because it's time at that point. There was, I thought, growth when you look at the film on Jordan Love this season. There are things that he did better on a whole of the season than he did in his first year in 2023. He was much better throwing the ball downfield than he was on the whole of the season in 2023. Matt LaFleur opened up the offense much more in his second year and provided a lot more verticality on the whole of the season than he did in his first season. With that said, you didn't see it down the stretch. And I do think having that – everyone wants to talk about number one receiver, and that's a fantasy football term. What it really is having a guy that in big moments you can trust and have the confidence to win the matchup time and time again. And they don't have that guy that each time ruthlessly can just win their matchup. They need a guy that in big moments can do what Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua did for Matthew Stafford. 3rd and 4, they throw it up to Cooper Kupp, and he goes up and wins a jump ball. Puka Nacua on the sideline when the Rams are trying to rally and make their game-winning drive. Puka Nacua on the sideline wins a jump ball, wins his matchup. You see that with Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown. You see that with A.J. Brown. Huge late, third down catch for A.J. Brown against the Rams. The guy that in the big moments can win those matchups, I think would help Jordan Love immensely. I think it's the biggest need on this roster this season. Most likely not a guy that you're just going to draft and come in and do that right away. I mean, it can be done, but that's hard. It's also hard to find that guy in the market. I don't know where they find that guy, but there's a lot of good here with this receiving group. But having the guy that you can trust to win that matchup when you absolutely need it, they don't have that. And this is still a young quarterback who is developing. And as long as you have a young quarterback that's trying to reach his full potential and you believe that can do that, has all the tools, but is still young and developing, you want to put every amount of asset that you can into that development. And that's where the Packers are to me offensively, is making sure that they give him that guy.
To go back to LaFleur, a viewer sent me an email that I thought it was interesting and I thought it was a fair question, and I want to get your guys' takes on it. In the press conferences with LaFleur, a lot of times you'll ask him like offensive questions. Usually his responses, it depends on what the defense is giving us. I know it could be one of two things. Maybe it's just he feels like he would be giving away the game plan to media. But my question, and I'll start with you, Spoon, when he's calling plays, when he's going through the offense, and it's so much of it depends on what the offense is dictating, do you feel like he does too much of that instead of we're the offense, we're the aggressor, we're going to run what we like, and the defense has to adjust? Or, I guess, what do you feel when you kind of hear comments like that? And Ryan, I'll get to you after that.
There's a little bit of legitimacy in that. I think you are trying to force teams to defend you. But, defenses are complex enough now that you don't want to run a play designed for man coverage against zone coverage. It's not a good play. If you're running a play for man coverage and you run a play for zone coverage or for cover two, that's not a good play. I mean, Aaron Rodgers made a living out of coming to the line of scrimmage, seeing what the defense was in, and both deciding where he would go with the ball and, changing the play and say, okay, their strength now is over here. We're expecting it there, but it's over here. And I think if there's a criticism, it's that they weren't ready for a lot of the changes that teams threw at them. A lot of teams played, and I think LaFleur said this, they played outside of their norm. So a zone team played a lot of man. A team that plays a lot of zone said, oh, we're going to throw man at them and see what happens. And I think the one thing they didn't do as well as they did the year before was adjust. But you have to take in consideration what the defense is playing. Otherwise, you're just knocking your head on the wall. Now, you could run into an 8-man box all day long. The Packers did that with Josh Jacobs. That's something you can do. But I think it's hard. I think it's dumb to keep running, man beaters against the zone coverage. It just doesn't really work.
Especially when you have an offense as this past year where your passing game is more predicated on scheming guys open than it is having the guy to win the matchup. Now we'll see if that changes in 2025. It needs to. But that is what the Packers passing game was okay, there's a lot of good receivers here. You got a lot of good depth, which is important. It's a luxury to have over the course of a season because of attrition. They had the depth to survive that, weather that, and still win 11 games when Romeo Doubs wasn't on the field because of a concussion or a suspension, or they didn't have Christian Watson because of the injury early in the season. You can miss a guy, but they have the depth because they just believe in scheming guys open. But when you're not and the book was out on this Packers offense late in the season, at some point, all those changes kind of funneled into one thing, and that was too high safety, keep an umbrella coverage deep on the back end of the secondary, don't allow anything vertical, and Josh Jacobs might get some yards, he might get his, but you don't give it to anyone else, and that is how you stop the Packers offense. So they're going to have to figure out how to do that. That again, it points to me to having a guy that can win the matchup and exploit certain things when you absolutely need it.
Let's talk about contracts and all of that. It's a handful of guys. Obviously, there's still guys in those rookie contracts, but there's a few questions right now as far as with, Josh Myers preparing for free agency, what they have decisions to make on with Devontae Wyatt and Quay Walker, if they want to get those fifth-year options. I know I'm probably missing some guys here and there, but for you, Spoon, I guess from what Gutekunst said, I guess feelings and thoughts on what could, transpire with, a few of these guys that have some contract decisions?
Their number one priority is re-signing Brandon McManus. I think that goes without saying. They got to get him back. They don't want to go into another season with a rookie kicker. And the guy performed pretty well. And there's nothing you can say against him other than, he missed a field goal in the playoff game. But, just about everybody did in the playoffs or has in the playoffs. So I think that's number one. Number two, I think, Myers, I know they really like Myers, and I think they're going to do whatever they can to keep him. I don't know if that injury is going to affect his off season, and by the time free agency rolls around, whether he's able to work out for teams or show them medical results that he's going to be okay. Didn't look like it was a serious injury, or it sounds like it's more of a bruise than anything, so he probably should be okay. But he's on that list of must-signs. I mean, at least in their mind, he is. I don't think so. I think they could move forward if they wanted. But after that, there's just some guys you want to try to get back, but I don't think there's anybody, if you lost them, you would say, oh, God, they're not going anywhere. They just don't. They have done a really good job of locking up their best players, and they have enough salary cap room to do some additions. And then the biggest decision of all is what they do with Jair Alexander, whether they cut him or not or trade him. And I kind of have a feeling that decision's been made. I don't see him coming back next year. How they're going to do that, I don't know. Can they get something for him? Yeah, it's probably someone desperate, and I say desperate because everybody in the world probably thinks the Packers are going to cut him. So you try to get one team or two teams who feel like they won't be able to get him or don't want to bid with somebody and want him under that contract. So I think that those are the major issues.
Yeah, as far as I guess with Jair, I forgot about that. It feels like it's been so long ago after what happened in the locker room during the clean out, where he did refuse to talk and said, along the lines of who knows if he'll even be here next year. Ryan, just what were your thoughts when you heard those comments?
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything Spoon just said. I almost wonder if the biggest decision really is Josh Myers, because I think I agree with Spoon. I think that there's not a lot of indecision when it comes to Jair Alexander. I would be surprised if he is back. It's interesting, and I'm not saying that they don't need a season opportunity to get better at cornerback if one exists. They should be vigilant there without question. But when you look at this defense, the guys that they had, which really didn't include Jair Alexander for most of the season, were good enough to still be a borderline top 5 defense. Like, it's not like they were hurting in the secondary. This was a secondary that didn't blow coverages. They tackled extremely well. It was absolutely – this was a secondary – this was a cornerback position absolutely good enough to make a Super Bowl run if the offense hadn't fallen into shambles down the stretch. They were good enough as is. So, again, you don't pass on an opportunity to get better at a position that is a premier position like corner. But if they don't make a major investment there, are they okay for 2025? I without Jair Alexander, I think they are. I think the much bigger need on defense is I think Brian Gutekunst miscalculated a little bit just how much of a transition it would be for that defensive front to transition 1 year from a 3-4 to the next in a 4-3. They need to make sure that they're well stocked up front to have the type of personnel that can thrive rushing the passer in that type of system. And they did it. TJ Slayton had a really good year again, but he's a 3-4 nose tackle. He's not a 4-3 defensive tackle. You're misplaying the guy, right? And that's not he was pretty good, but he's kind of fish out of water in a 4-3. So making sure you're stocked there, that to me is by far the biggest emphasis on that side of the ball. Why Josh Myers is the biggest decision to me that they have to make, because they might. I wouldn't say you absolutely have to sign. I wouldn't say it's a must sign. They might just be fine if they don't re-sign Josh Myers. But this was a top 5 rushing offense in the league. This was a quarterback that was, and a lot of this was on Jordan Love, okay? But a quarterback that was sacked as little as anyone in the league. The pass protection, the run blocking had a significant part to do with that. And this was an offensive line where all 5 starters played over 1,000 snaps counting playoffs. Josh Myers is the leader of that offensive line. He is the quarterback of that offensive line. The coaching staff trusts him. I thought what Brian Gutekunst said about Josh Myers, that Jordan Love has a lot of trust in him as his center, was a resounding endorsement of Josh Myers. So if you had your way, I think that the Packers would, for good reason, much rather have Josh Myers back. Because I don't think you want to tinker all that much with a good offensive line that paved the way for the run game and for the most part kept Jordan Love's jersey clean week in and week out. Josh Myers also had his best season. So are they going to be okay if they don't re-sign Jair Alexander? Josh Myers? Yes. I think that they still have a lot of talent on that side, and I think that the issues they have to fix go far beyond whether or not Josh Myers is back. But I think that you think long and hard before you letting that guy walk.
To bounce off that, Spoon, because Gutekunst did allude to, he said there could be a chance of some shuffling around on the offensive line. So if, let's say, if Myers didn't come back, obviously you have Rasheed Walker, you have Elton Jenkins, Sean Ryan, Zach Tom. I know Elton Jenkins played a little bit of center. Do you think they might, do some shuffling around in that regard and hope Josh Morgan and Jacob Monk are healthier, or do you think they might try to add some depth? I know it's just speculating, but do you have a sense what they might even try to do in that regard?
Well, I'm not sure what they're going to do, but since, we get to play DM on this show, I think you have to continue to build the offensive line. I think we've seen what teams are kicking butt with in the playoffs or during the season. Detroit has a fantastic offensive line. Philadelphia has a fantastic offensive line. Kansas City probably has the best offensive line. Buffalo has a really good offensive line. Baltimore's offensive line was pretty good. I think they need to do better. And I think they need to keep pushing with competition. They got Jordan Morgan. I think they need to try him out at left tackle. Give Rasheed Walker some competition. He's not a perfect player out at left tackle. He's a promising player and still developing, but every one of those positions should have competition. And maybe you can do better than Sean Ryan at right guard. I mean, I think your anchors are still Zach Tom at right or left tackle. He could play left tackle. Elton Jenkins will be somewhere in there. And then throw what you can at the line. It's rare that you get all five guys to start, in a year. And I think they need more depth. Keep developing Travis Glover and Kadeem Telfort and give them a chance to play a little bit. I know they're really high on Glover. They think he's going to be like a right tackle behemoth type guy who can move people. And but they got to lift that. They got to coach that guy, and they got to get him ready to play, and then make those guys compete. Make every single one of those guys compete for their jobs. And Myers would be, good to have back. But like Ryan said, if they don't get him back, I don't think it's the end of the world.
Spoon, the reason to me why they really need to still be vigilant in putting assets into building that offensive line is, and you alluded to it, and it's what I said. They had 5 starters play more than 1,000 snaps counting playoffs. That is a unicorn. That doesn't happen. And you certainly can't expect that to just happen again. And the very rare occasion that we saw them need to rely on some depth there, they showed they didn't really have much. It was a problem, right? So what happens if what usually happens in 2025 and there's injuries on the offensive line? You don't have 5 starters playing over 1,000 snaps. Like that unit, that best 5 was a pretty good best 5. They were pretty good, but we don't know what they have behind them. And it didn't look pretty when we saw it. So the thing in my mind, I don't know what to make of Jordan Morgan. He got funneled to guard very quickly because, in the words of Adam Stinovich, they recognized that's where the opportunity was going to be in 2024. He wasn't good at guard, and then he missed most of the year with injury. So that hurts development. I think you have to do what they planned to after the draft last year, which was, in terms of competition during the offseason, fail him at tackle first. Give him an opportunity to tackle. See what he can do there, because it didn't look pretty at guard. And then if he fails to tackle, then you start thinking, okay, where's he fit inside? But the biggest question to me, the most worrisome thing with Jordan Morgan is just all the time that he missed as a rookie, not being able to develop because of the injuries. And it doesn't mean that he can't get there. I mean, look at Sean Ryan. His first 2 years, you would have thought this guy's going to wash out of the league. You didn't see him. And then he found a home. He was pretty good at right guard. So it can happen like that for Jordan Morgan. Sometimes it takes time, but it's his rookie season went the opposite of how you would hope if you were the Packers, from the injuries and not having a seamless transition inside, which a lot of times the Packers have done this for years. You draft a tackle thinking it'll be pretty easy to slide him down to guard, but it's not always the case, and it wasn't the case for Jordan Morgan. So that's a big question mark this offseason.
Yeah, I think if you take a guy in the first round and you decide you're going to move him to guard, then start him at guard and start him there and give him all the number 1 reps and you're going to have to go through some growing pains. And they didn't do that. They tried to, split reps with Sean Ryan, and he didn't develop fast enough because he didn't have all the practice reps. Sorry, but Sean Ryan developed and became a good player, but he could have done that with the second team. And so if you're committed to, your first round pick, who is very talented, then do it. But, don't kind of half-ass it and put him there and rotate him. Either that, or if you're going to rotate him, then let him have some snaps at left tackle. Put him in at left tackle, put him in at right guard, and then let that, kind of decide where he's going to go.
Well, as we wrap up another edition of the Green 19 podcast, just get some final words and thoughts from you guys and things that have kind of popped up and what you've seen. Ryan, you can go and kick us off.
I think this is a foundational, a launching pad type offseason for this Packers team that has a lot of the pieces required to go and win a Super Bowl and make that run, but they're not there yet. They're clearly not there yet. So where do they have to go, I think, is the question of this offseason. And they're starting from a standpoint of, as Spoon alluded to earlier, a defense with Jeff Hafley that is a solidified top 10, potentially top 5 defense in the NFL. It's a hell of a place to start because for a very long time, this Packers team thought every offseason was the same cycle of, hey, maybe this year, and it was never that year. Well, last year was that year. They have to keep that. They have to maintain that and then grow that. I think you look at another way that these playoff teams have really had success. It's getting pass rush traditionally with 4. That is a big question for this Packers defense. Where can they find that? I think this to me is an offseason where you can't get younger than being the youngest team 2 years in a row. And they will always be draft and develop. But this is a market type offseason. They have the salary cap. And if you got to trade even some premium draft picks for the right guy, as Brian Gutekunst would say, the right guy, you don't hesitate to do that because what they need is top-end talent at the depth. They've got tremendous depth pretty much everywhere. There isn't a position on this roster you look at and say, other than maybe offensive line, right? Because we don't know. Other than offensive line where you look at and say, not a lot of depth there. They've got depth. They need more of that top end, the Xavier McKinney, Josh Jacobs, and it's a lot easier to say than to actually do. But scour the league to find those type of guys at pass rush, at receiver, at corner if it's out there, right? That to me is it's a market type offseason and utilizing the market as much as you can, while obviously doing what you can. Hey, the draft's in Green Bay. Do it as much as you can to stay true to your blueprint of draft and develop. But if there's ever an offseason where you want to really hit the market, it would be this offseason. I think taking advantage of any potential opportunity to load up on the market is really big for Brian Gutekunst this spring.
What about you, Spoon?
Well, 2 things. One, LaFleur's got to get his staff straightened out. So he fired Jason Rebrovich, which, is either a scapegoating of why they couldn't get pass rush, or it's legitimate that he just wasn't the right guy for that defense. And I know one of the guys we're talking about has been with the 49ers and with the Jets with Robert Saleh. And so his background fits in perfectly with Hafley. So we'll see where that goes. LaFleur usually interviews a ton of guys. So we'll see how that plays out. I think he's still, I don't know if there's discussions going on elsewhere, but I'm sure there are. And then, I had heard that Bisaccia was talking about retirement. No, we haven't heard anything, so that makes me think that it's probably not going to happen. That maybe he decided he could fill out his contract. He's got 1 more year left, but we'll see. LaFleur moves so slowly on these things, and we don't know whether he said Tom Clements retired right away, like the first day. So we haven't heard anything on Bisaccia, so my gut tells me that that's going to stay the same. But other stuff will happen. Then off season, I still think the draft is primo. I mean, God, if they could just get one Edgerrin Cooper, they would be happy, or Edgerrin Cooper and then Evan Williams out of the next draft. That would change the face of their team, especially if they could do it on offense. I'd be careful about trading those picks. I think Gutekunst made a really good point about trading the picks for older guys with salaries, and that not only are you giving up the pick, you're giving up the salary cap space. So it's like a double whammy. But if they can scour and find some free agent guys that can help them, they need to add some experience. I think they really do. I think it doesn't hurt to add experience, guys who've been winners and guys who've had success in the system that you're installing. So, they have work to do. The problem is that a lot of teams have done a good job of keeping their players, and there's not a lot of stars out there to be had in free agency. So, but I think they got to have another draft.
Got to ask, what were your thoughts from you guys when Oren Burks from the Eagles was fined for the hit on Keyshawn Nixon, which is kind of funny to think about it now, obviously, because it's a big hit, fumble, Eagles score, Packers never recover. What was your thoughts when you saw that he was fined for a hit that was not flagged in that game?
I don't know how they missed it. I mean, but I see a lot of things going on in playoff games that, man, you're like, what is going on?
No.
But officiating is they're humans, and I'm not sure how you didn't see that head to head, and I don't know how they didn't reverse that. And I'm usually the last guy to say officiating hurt the Packers because I just think it happens for both sides. But it's still a head scratcher as to how he didn't come out of that pile with being rewarded the ball. And why it wasn't a head-to-head.
The Packers very well, with the way their offense was playing, very well may have lost that game anyway. But let's not pretend like that wasn't a huge impact on the game. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're spotting them 7-0, and then this offense that's trying to figure it out, this Packers offense that's searching for answers, is instead of doing that in a 0-0 game, because the defense played really well for the rest of that first half. Instead of doing it in a 0-0 game, when it's anyone's ball, you are in a hole right away. That changes the game. It was a terrible missed call. And it's also par for the course because there's another thing that stands out from watching the playoffs so far. The officiating everywhere is brutal. It is. Yeah, Dom, I think you said, there's a lot of bad coaches. There's a lot of players making mistakes. There's a lot of bad officiating. The Will Anderson roughing the passer on Patrick Mahomes was a hellaciously bad call. It was comically bad. Are you kidding me? There's no – it was – and on one hand, the way that Patrick Mahomes is officiated, you got to give Patrick Mahomes credit because he milks that for all it's worth, and it has become a competitive advantage for them. And he's got the wherewithal to use that not everyone does, because if everyone could use it, everyone would use it. It's a Patrick Mahomes thing. He has the wherewithal. The game moves slow enough that when he goes downfield, he can search around for anyone, just stand downfield and, hey, here's someone sprinting at me trying to get to me because I'm a ball carrier, and now I'll slide and 15 yards on you. There's a lot of savvy in his game. With that said, if you're an official, you don't have to help him out. And it's not just a Patrick Mahomes thing. It's a what it's looked like to me, the face mask that wasn't on the Washington Commanders defender against David Montgomery. That a terrible call that gave a free first down 15 yards. It's everywhere. It's a systemic issue. If this continues, the NFL needs to be able to incorporate objective, not defensive pass interference penalties, but objective replay access to penalties. Did Will Anderson's helmet actually forcibly contact Patrick Mahomes head-to-head fashion or not? You can tell that on replay because did the Commanders defender's hand touch the face mask or the shoulder pad? You can tell that on replay because you can't miss these calls this time of year, and there are way too many missed calls. Did Oren Burks' face mask, was it a head-to-head hit or not? That's all objective. Like, you can see that, and it's clear. If they continue missing calls at this rate, they're going to have to make a change because it's bad for the product.
It's just alarmingly inconsistent. Because, like, I'm watching the very next game, and it looks like Lamar Jackson is thrown out of bounds on a late hit, no flag. Josh Allen took a hit, and it looked like it was an actual targeting hit. No flag was thrown, and it doesn't help because Mahomes didn't go out of bounds. He tried to dance back inside. I think when you do that, you are a ball carrier.
You got to
take a hit. So that's kind of that issue. So that's another thing they got to fix. Like when these quarterbacks, it looks like they're going out of bounds, but then they'll dance back inside, and I don't know.
Remember, Jonathan Owens got 15-yard penalty, blasted Mahomes when he tried to do that, and it was totally legit hit because he tried to take it upfield. Yeah. So I mean, there's some things they need to do. I think they got to have the very best crews in the playoffs. I mean, maybe there aren't any good crews, or maybe there's only a couple of crews, but there were just a lot of missed things in the Eagles game. I mean, both ways. But the very first play of the game shouldn't be like a screw up.
Hey, here's a fun story. Talking about the difficulty of defenders tackling running quarterbacks. The first time, Spoon, I'm sure you remember this, the first time that we knew Rasul Douglas was a special mind for the game, because the Packers 2021 October, they plucked him off the Cardinals practice squad, and he came in. He was pretty quiet. We didn't really know much about this newcomer from the practice squad. And he got a penalty for tackling Justin Fields 10, 15 yards downfield sliding. And he was asked about that at the podium, I believe, at the time. And because it was 2021, it was right after COVID, so that's where they did the interviews then. And he opened up in a way of just the dilemma that you're in there, where you have Justin Fields running at you, and he can make you look real stupid real quick because he's got dynamic legs, and you're not trying to hurt somebody. You're not trying to you know the rules. You're not trying to take a shot on the quarterback in this league today, but he's a ball carrier downfield, and you can't give up a touchdown either. And just, what goes through the mind of these defenders, I don't know what the answer is there. It's part of the game, and it's become a huge part of the game with the advent of RPOs and dynamic athletes playing quarterback at a very high level. It's going to be part of the game, but I don't envy a defensive player in this league.
Yeah, it's a new game. Just got to adjust. There are more Lamars and more Mahomes, more Justin Fields and Kyler Murray and Jaden Daniels. That's the name of the game now. You just got to get used to it. So, guys, I think a rant on officiating is probably a good way to end this podcast. I think it sounds good to everybody. So thank you all for checking it out. And I guess we got to get ready for what's next. I know, Ryan, you're working on some film. Spoon, you got some columns you're working on. I guess, is there anything you guys want to tease that viewers can be expecting in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, my annual postseason grades will be coming out in a couple of weeks. Don't know the start time yet. I'm very much in my bunker right now. And it's one of my very favorite projects of the year. I learned so much. And I crunch every play of every game. That I have a lot of conversations with people that know a whole lot more than I do. And to see it all kind of truncated together like that, like really compressed together, you learn a lot. So I'm looking for it's always fun to kind of share what you learn when you take a really investigative look at the season as a whole.
And then Spoon, obviously the combine coming up, so looking forward to what's to come there.
Soon. Yeah, and I'll be following every staff change that's made and interviews and things like that, and that's going to continue all through this week. So. And when it's complete, it'll be interesting to see exactly what they have and hear what LaFleur has to say about it if he'll address it.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking forward to the offseason. Me personally, I'm about to hit the road and go to Kentucky and see my family, so I'm excited about that.
Get out of the cold, man.
Exactly. But they've had more snow than there's been in Wisconsin, so I don't know what the deal with that is. But
I'll bet it's not 30 below there, though.
Yeah, that's the thing that folks not from here don't realize until you actually move here is you think, oh, all the snow in Green Bay. That's not always. It's too cold. It's too cold to snow like that. You don't get the snow in Green Bay. You get the cold. It's more snowed down a little south of here because it's not as cold and it's better snow conditions. So that's something I learned when I moved here. It's not the snow that gets you. It's the wind chill.
Very much. So I'm looking forward to
it's the humidity.
Yeah. That's right. So I'm looking forward to the heat wave I'm about to go get in Kentucky. And again, just for everyone that checks it out, we do appreciate it. We'll have plenty of stuff to keep you up to date on this off season, and we'll have more podcasts. It's not the end of us until August or anything like that. So when news pops up, we'll definitely hop back on StreamYard or wherever the case may be to just talk all things Packers, because 2025, the season will be here before you know it. So thank you all for checking out the Green 19 podcast. For Ryan Wood, Tom Silverstein, I'm Dominique Yates.